Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We're ready to begin our Torah session. The Torah portion for this week is Vayeshev, which if you're in the Blue Scroll Chumash, you can find it on page 198. And now we start the longest running story in the Torah, the story of Joseph and his brothers, which will span Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, and Vayechi. 4 Torah portions that are going to discuss one episode or a series of episodes, but one narrative of the story of Jacob, his son Joseph, and his brothers. And it's the longest running story because it's a very pivotal story from many perspectives. First of all, it's the fulfillment of the covenant that God made with Abraham, where God told Abraham, your children will become a great nation. But first they're going to have to go through Egyptian slavery, and then they will emerge and become the Jewish nation. The fulfillment of this destiny of the Jewish people occurs through Joseph and the brothers, because Joseph's thrown into the pit, sold into slavery. And as a result of that, the Jewish people move, the family of Jacob relocates from Israel, Canaan, to Egypt, and then ultimately they are redeemed from Egypt and taken to the land of Israel by Moses, their leader, and ultimately given the Torah at Mount Sinai and become the Jewish nation. So obviously this is a pivotal story from that perspective, but on a interpersonal human level, a lot of very powerful lessons to be learned from this 4-part series of Torah portions, because it's an incredible story about many things, but faith in God. Joseph maintains his faith in God throughout all of his high ordeals. It's a story of resilience and perseverance. Despite all the challenges that are thrown at him, he still ultimately fulfills his visions and his dreams of becoming the viceroy of Egypt. And most powerfully of all, it's a story of forgiveness. It's a story of Joseph ultimately forgiving his brothers for all the terrible things they did to him and all the suffering he had to endure as a result of what they had done to him. And that's where the story begins. Chapter 37 of Genesis begins with Jacob. Jacob, if you recall, was born in the womb with his twin brother Esav. They had very different personalities. They clashed with each other even in the womb, different paths, different directions. And he wrestled with his brother throughout his life. And then he had to run away from his brother and went to the house of his uncle Laban, had to endure 20 years in Laban's house. And then he fled from Laban's house and ultimately made peace with his brother Esav. And now he comes back to the land of Israel. And the opening words of the portion is Vayeshev Yaakov Beretz Meguri Aviv Beretz Canaan. Jacob settled down in the land of his ancestors, the land of Canaan, which is Israel. And Rashi tells us that Jacob's mindset was, okay, it's been a rough ride, I've been through a lot, but thank God I'm intact, my family's intact, everything is going well. Now I could finally sit down. I settled my differences with Esav, worked out my problems with Laban. I have a beautiful family now. Now I'm going to sit back on the rocking chair, on the recliner, and get a little nachas for my family and enjoy, my old age. And just when he thought that, just that when he planned to settle in and retire, so to speak, a whole new set of problems come at him seemingly out of nowhere. And what were these set of problems? We all know that Jacob had 2 loves. Rachel was his greatest love. And then, of course, he ended up marrying Leah. So he favored Rachel, and therefore he favored Rachel's firstborn son, which was Joseph. And here our rabbis are not afraid to be critical of Jacob because, the Torah tells it as it is. We have to learn the good, but also the not so good. And the Torah says that Jacob made a fatal mistake. And the reason we learn about Jacob's mistake is to make sure we don't repeat that mistake. And that mistake was that he favored one child above the others. And rabbis tell us never show favoritism to one child over the others. It can lead to only no good. It leads to jealousy, strife, and even worse than that, as we see in the story of Joseph, his brothers actually committed, or you would today, attempted murder. And our rabbis put it this way. We all know that Jacob made a special coat for Joseph, a coat of many colors. And our rabbis say, think about this. Because of a few extra coins that he spent on Joseph, that he didn't spend on the other brothers, which was the coat of many colors. Today's day and age, you say it costs $30, not a lot of money to buy a coat of many colors. But because of this little extra coat that didn't cost much, look how many problems, how much suffering came upon the family of Jacob. Not to justify what the brothers did out of envy and jealousy, but it tells you as a parent how detrimental, how harmful it can be to favor one child over the others. And what's interesting is when one sibling sees that a parent is showing favoritism to another parent, the logical thing is to resent the parent, because the parent is the one who did show the favoritism. The child who received the favoritism didn't do anything wrong. But that's not what happens. The sibling turns against the sibling. So you think you're doing that child a favor by showing them favoritism and giving them more love and attention or physical gifts. You're actually causing a rift between your children, and you're causing the siblings to resent that child who received the favoritism. And that's what happens with the story of Joseph. So lesson number one from this week's Torah portion is never create jealousy amongst your children by treating them any different than one another. All the children should receive the same amount of love, unconditional love from their parents. And we see that the rabbis say because of that coat of many colors, the entire Jewish nation went to Egypt and went through slavery and suffering, all because of a little coat that had such a terrible ripple effect. So what does it say? Joseph was 17 years old. He's a teenager, and he's a shepherd for his father, his flock. And he had a special bond with the children of the handmaids, the concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah. And the other brothers would not treat the children of the concubines, of the hand servant maids as well. They looked down on them. They treated them in an inferior way. And very clearly, the Torah now points the second mistake of Joseph. First, we talk about Jacob showing favoritism. Now we're talking about Joseph. What does he do? Black and white. Verse 2. Vayaveh Yosef et dibatam ra'al aviem. Joseph would carry their bad actions and words to his father. In other words, in simple English, you'll say he was a tattletale. He was a teenager. He was a kid. He wasn't that old. He wasn't a mature adult. But he would run and tell his dad, "You hear what he did? You hear what he did?" So now the kid who's the favorite is also the tattletale. The batam ra means evil speech, negative speech. He spoke lashon hara. He spoke ill about his brothers. That combination, that lethal combination of favoritism, and now he's the tattletale who runs to his father and bad mouths us to his father, is what caused this deep animosity and hatred towards Joseph. And so the next verse says, verse 4, the brothers saw, they perceived above all the other brothers. And therefore, Torah, black and white, they hated him. They couldn't stand him. And then there are four very interesting words. They couldn't speak to him peacefully. So the simple meaning is they hated him. And because they hated him, they couldn't speak to him peacefully. So Rashi gives his interpretation. Rashi says, this is actually something positive that you could learn from the brothers. When one person hates another person, there's one or two things they could do. One is, I don't want to talk to you. I hate you. I don't want to talk to you. Now you think that's the worst possible thing. Says, no, there's something even worse. What's even worse? When you pretend like you're their friend, even though in your heart you hate them. So therefore, rabbis say there are some people and this is Rashi's term, echad b'peh v'echad b'lev, which means they're one in the mouth and one in the heart, which means their mouth and their heart don't align, don't match up. In their heart, they feel one thing, but in their mouth, they say something else. Now, you may say that's a good thing. Don't show what's in your heart. Be peaceful, speak nice. But rabbis say, no, that's being a hypocrite, because now you're misleading the person. What's the proper thing to do, which the brothers didn't do? The worst thing is to pretend like you love the person when you don't, because nothing can get resolved by acting peacefully when inwardly, internally, you can't stand the person. What the brothers did was they just didn't talk to him. They didn't want to, they said, look, we don't like you, we're not going to talk to you. But what a person's really supposed to do is as follows. There's a verse in the Torah that says, Lo sisnat achicha bilbavecha. Do not hate your brother, your fellow man, in your heart. And then it goes on to say, Hocheach tocheach semisecha. Rebuke or reprove, shall you reprove your fellow man? In other words, instead of carrying it in your heart, speak to the person. Try to tell them what it is that is hurting you, how they're offending you, how they're disappointing you, how they're angering you. In other words, the Torah encourages us to not keep it bottled up. A lot of times people keep things bottled up. They grin and bear it. The Torah says, no, do not keep it in your heart, speak it out. In other words, where there's only pent-up anger, that could lead to violence. That's what happens here. They keep their anger pent up, the brothers. They don't express it. They don't have dialogue. They don't have a conversation with him. And therefore, ultimately, when opportunity arises, they see him alone in the field, boom, in the pit, throw him out in, sell him into slavery. Because that anger will manifest itself, unfortunately, in some negative form of violence or harm, as opposed to what the Torah encourages us to do, which is very difficult, which is confront the person, discuss it with the person, open up a conversation, a dialogue, a discourse, because the only thing that can bridge one heart with the other, one mind with the other, is conversation. Now, it doesn't mean we're always going to agree. Sometimes people choose to disagree. And I could speak to you about something and you don't see it my way. But at least it gives me the opportunity to try to put myself in your shoes and see where you're coming from. And then there's at least a hope that maybe there'll be some kind of a reconciliation, some kind of meeting of the minds, some kind of, mutual understanding that could at least, if not completely resolve it, at least temper it, or at least more compassion and tolerance and respect for one another. So that's what the Torah encourages us to do always. And unfortunately, the brothers did not do that. And that's what the Torah emphasizes. They weren't able to speak from peacefully. And that's why it ended up having the terrible results that it had. Now, we know that Joseph is a dreamer. And here we come to Joseph's dreams. By the way, there's a beautiful song that I really love. I'm going to tell you, if you want to write this down, you can. There's a singer in Israel called Hanan Ben Ari. In English, they spell it Hanan, 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 Ben Ben Ari Ari. He's a wonderful young religious Orthodox singer. Religious, and he has a lot of great songs. And one of his great songs, just like there's a movie about Joseph and the coat of many colors, multicolored Technicolor coat, he has a song called Kol Achad Cholem K'mo Yosef. Everyone dreams like Joseph. And it's a very favorite song of mine. And I think on YouTube you could see the way he performs this song in Caesarea, which is a big amphitheater in Israel, and there's English subtitles to the song. Just write Cholem, Cholem, K'mo Yosef, like Joseph, Kmoyosef. And basically, he does something very beautiful. He takes the book of Genesis and he shows you how we could find ourselves in every story. He says every single person was banished from paradise. Every single person has a flood raging in them. Every single person has a rebellion like the Tower of Babel. Every person had to leave his father's home like Abraham. Every single person almost slaughtered his son, like the story of the binding of Isaac. He goes through every story in the Bible, but then the chorus of the song is, everyone has a dream in life, like Joseph. But they have also been thrown into the pit. He says everyone has a dream like Joseph, and everyone has been thrown into the pit. We all know the feeling of dreams and also the feeling of being thrown in the pit or under the bus, whatever you want to call it. But the point is that Joseph has great dreams. And what are these dreams? So, that he has two sets of dreams. The first set of dream is that he's in the field and everyone's collecting their sheaves of grain and his stands erect and the others bow down to him. And then he has a second set of dreams where the 11 stars and the sun and the moon are bowing down to him, representing his 11 brothers and his father and mother. In other words, he clearly has dreams of grandiose dreams of being a leader, being a ruler, of everyone bowing to him. And I don't want to say foolishly, because God forbid, but he immaturely, he starts telling his brothers. I mean, it's one thing to have those dreams, but then to go incite your brothers by telling them that you're having these dreams, realize that they already don't like him because he's the favorite child. They already don't like him because he brings tattletaling to his father. And now he's telling them in his dreams that they're going to all bow down to him. So you could see how Joseph is an accomplice to everything that happens to him, because he clearly incites their jealousy and anger towards him. And a matter of fact, when he tells his father about the dreams, his father rebukes him. And he says, what are you saying? Are you implying that me and your mother are going to bow down to you? And then the Torah says the brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. In other words, Jacob publicly rebuked Joseph because he didn't want jealousy amongst his kids or hatred or fighting. But in his heart, he was like, oh, if only my son would rise to such greatness. I would love to see my son be a ruler, be a great leader. In other words, he believed in his son's potential. But that's the dreams of Joseph. Now, I just want to sort of show you something interesting. We know that Joseph has two dreams, the sheaves of grain and then the bowing down of the sun and the moon and the stars. At the end of this week's Torah portion, we're going to get to the dreams of the butler and the breaker in the prison that he's going to interpret. And then we're going to get to the ultimate dreams, which is Pharaoh's dreams on his bed, when Pharaoh dreams about the cows, the skinny cows eating up the fat cows, the thin sheaves of grain, devouring the robust sheaves of grain, right? And ultimately, he interprets the butler and the baker's dreams, and then he is called out of prison to interpret. That's next week. Pharaoh's dreams, and he becomes the viceroy of Egypt because Pharaoh is so impressed with him. And the question is, what's the difference between the first set of dreams that Joseph has that land him in the pit versus the dreams of Pharaoh that get him out of the pit? And one answer is that the first set of dreams, he's dreaming about himself, about his own greatness. The last set of dreams that he interprets of Pharaoh, he's dreaming about mankind, he's interpreting the dream of Pharaoh that you're going to save famine. And that's the answer. The answer is when you dream selfish, self-indulgent dreams about your own self, your own ego, that lands you in the pit. What gets you out of the pit, so to speak, what raises you up to greatness is when you have dreams about the future of mankind and betterment of your fellow man, the salvation of your of the people, like in the case of Joseph, how to save the land from famine. So everyone has dreams in life. The question is, what do you see in your dreams? Are you just seeing yourself, or are you seeing others and the well-being of others in your dreams? That's the way you advance not only the world, but yourself, because you raise yourself up to a higher level. So that is the background to everything that's going to follow. Everything that's going to follow is going to be Joseph's journey to the land of Egypt, becoming viceroy of Egypt. We all know the story because we read it every year. The brothers are ultimately going to come to Egypt because the famine is so severe that they need to acquire food. And he's going to reveal himself at some point and then reunite the family in the land of Egypt. And then at the end of the Torah, he's going to pass away, as Jacob will, and the tribes will pass away, and their children will ultimately be enslaved in Egypt. And that's when Moses steps into the picture with his brother Aaron, and then we get to the book of Exodus. But just a few points about Joseph before we even get into the details of his story. Joseph is the only biblical figure that gets two titles. One title is in this week's Torah portion. He's called an Ish Matzliach, a successful man. He is called a successful man because whatever he does, he's successful at. In other words, he was successful at home as the son of Jacob, but in the pit and then sold into slavery, he becomes successful as the chief servant in the house of his master Potiphar. And then when he's thrown into the prison, it says the warden trusted him with everything in the prison because he was the model prisoner, so to speak. In other words, he sees that the butler and the baker look downcast. He interprets their dreams. He's always successful wherever he's placed. It's interesting that the two times in the Parsha that Joseph is referred to as a successful man, and I said there's no one else in the Bible that the Torah says he was a successful man. The two times the Torah refers to him as being successful is as a servant in the house of his master and as a prisoner in Egypt when he was in the prison. And what's very interesting is, like, imagine you meet someone and imagine, you hear a conversation between two people, two mothers, two fathers. Oh, my son is so successful. He's the CEO of this company. He built a big business. He runs this. He's the head of that. Okay, he's very successful. Then the other person, oh, son, he's so successful. He's the head butler in the house of some rich guy. Or he's the head of the whole prison. He's an inmate in prison, but he's the head inmate. He's in charge of all the other inmates. You say that's successful? And that's where the Torah describes success. The house of his master and in the prison. And obviously the message is that we don't always control where life places us, our circumstances, our surroundings. The question is if we make the very best out of our circumstances. So what's in our hands is how we deal with the cards that were given to us. We don't choose, unfortunately, sometimes the struggles of our lives. We're placed in different predicaments. And people make a big mistake sometimes. They say, they judge people based on their circumstances. Some people are born into very good circumstances and they have a good life. They're not successful. They were just born, into successful circumstances. Other people are born with a lot of challenges, not just external, but internal challenges. It's not your struggles that define you, like Joseph. It's what creativity you bring to your struggles, how you deal with that adversity. That's the definition of success. And that's very clearly illustrated by Joseph. The other title given to Joseph, this is not in the Torah, but in rabbinic literature, he is the only biblical personality. Every biblical personality gets a title. Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather. Sarah Imenu, Sarah, our matriarch. David HaMelech, David, our king. Eliyahu and Avi, Elijah, the prophet, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Joseph is called Yosef HaTzadik. Joseph, the righteous one. Why is he the righteous one? So we know that there's two pillars in Judaism. There's commandments between man and God and between man and man. And in both of these realms, Joseph was tested and he passed with flying colors in both cases. The first one is in this week's Torah portion. The wife of his master lays her eyes upon him. And one day when he's home alone with no one else in the house, she's with him alone. She seduces him and says, come, be with me, be intimate with me, lie with me. And we all know what happens. He rips himself out of her hands. he says, how can I do such a thing? And he tears himself out and flees from the house. As our rabbis say, run to do a mitzvah and flee from an aver. He doesn't just stick around and say no. He runs as far as he can from this woman. And of course, when her husband comes home, she has to explain why he's not in the house. She has his coat because when he ran out, she held on to his coat and said, oh, he tried to seduce me and he ran away. And he's then arrested and thrown into prison, falsely accused. So think about Joseph. He's a young man, teenager, sold into slavery. A few years later, he's in this house of this master. His brothers abandoned him, betrayed him, threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery. I don't know how he felt about his father, but his father was the one who sent him out in the field, as we're going to see, to look for the brothers. So he was probably could have had theoretically resentment towards his father. Why did you send me out there in the field alone? You knew the brothers didn't like me. You were setting me up for trouble. And yet he is faced with a temptation to be seduced by his master's wife. And, just try to think about a lowly slave and your master's wife desires you. And this could be not only an emotional comfort for him, who's torn away from his family, but also it could be a way to achieve status. But yet his morality and his righteousness is so strong that he's literally able to pull himself out of her grip. You imagine how strong you have to be to do that, especially when you're a young man living so far away from your home. But our rabbis say he saw the image of his father Jacob before his eyes, and he said, I can't do this. This is immoral. I can't do it. And even though he maybe knew there would be consequences, because you don't reject the wife of the master, she's not going to take it well, but he does the right thing. That's a tzaddik. That's between man and God. He was alone. He could have gotten away with it. Nobody would even know about it. But yet, God is there. He's not going to do something immoral. And then, of course, at the end of the story, which is in 2 weeks from now, when he does reveal himself to his brothers, says, I am Joseph. And the brothers are so astonished and ashamed because they're facing the brother that they tried to kill or sell into slavery. And he forgives them in the most magnanimous way. He says, listen, you didn't send me here. God sent me here. I'm here for a purpose, to save the land from famine. And I'm not in the place of God to judge you. And it all turned out for the best. And he says, now go quickly, bring our father down to Egypt. I'm going to set you up and give you the best housing accommodations and pasture for your animals. The ability to forgive and let go of the hurt, of the pain, of the resentment. These two stories make Joseph the most incredible tzaddik. That's why he's called Yosef HaTzaddik. And I just want to point out something. We know the ultimate miracle was the splitting of the sea. 10 plagues, Exodus from Egypt, splitting of the sea. And in the Hallel prayer, which is taken from the book of Psalms, it says, Hayam Ra'a Bayanos, which means the sea saw and it fled. We always say sea saw, right? What did the sea see? Well, the sea saw and it fled. What does that mean? So rabbis say, commentaries say that the sea saw the casket of Joseph. When Joseph died, he said, bury me in the land of Egypt. But when God takes you out of Egypt, when God remembers you, as he promised our forefather Abraham that he'll take you out of Egypt, take my remains with you for burial in the land of Israel. And that's what happened. They carried it for 40 years, the casket of Joseph, until it was buried in the city of Shechem. And this summer, Dini and I were in Israel. We got to see from a distance. You can't go into the city of Shechem because Nablus is an Arab town that's dangerous. Once a month on Rosh Chodesh, the IDF escorts a group of people to go pray at the tomb of Joseph. Well, we stood as close as we can in a city that we could overlook it and see it from a distance. But the point is that the sea saw the casket of Joseph and it split. And our rabbis say, what was the merit of Joseph? I mean, Moses and Aaron were at the sea. Why did it only split for the casket of Joseph? And rabbis say, what did the sea have to do? The sea had to break its nature. The nature of the sea is to flow. And suddenly the sea had to stop and separate. go against its natural course and allow the Jews to walk through and then cover up the Egyptians and drown them when they came through. So in whose merit did the sea run against its own current? In the merit of Joseph. You know why? Because Joseph was a person who personified the ability of man to run against their own current. The natural process, the natural inclination of a person is to give in to temptation. But Joseph resisted that. He pulled back, he fled. And our rabbis say, in the verse that we're going to get to in the story, Joseph, it says, Vayanas hachutzo. He fled outdoors. The word Vayanas. He fled outdoors. He fled the house of his master. And what does it say by the sea when it saw whatever it saw? We're not sure what, till the rabbis tell us. It says, Hayam Ra'ah Vayanos. It fled. So rabbis say, in whose merit did the sea flee? In the merit of the one who fled from the sin, which was Joseph when he fled from the arms, from the grip of his master's wife, Potiphar. So Yosef is this incredible figure, really a towering giant. What's fascinating, and this ties into this week's Torah portion as well. There's so much going on in this week's Torah portion, just unbelievable. The plot, the drama, the twists, the turns. But there's another biblical figure very prominent in this week's Torah portion, and that is Judah. Now, we are called Jews from the word Judah, Yehudim, because Judah became the king of the brothers, not Joseph. Joseph was the first one to reach the throne, first member of the family to ever sit in a royal position as a viceroy. But ultimately, the kings of Israel come from the loins of Judah, King David, King Mashiach eventually. How could you top Joseph? Joseph was a towering figure, as we just said. He was a tzaddik. So we all know that in Judaism there's the tzaddik, the perfectly righteous person, and then there's the Baal Teshuvah, the person who succumbs to temptation, to mistakes, but ultimately does Teshuvah, repents. And who is higher? Our rabbis tell us the Baal Teshuvah, because as great as it is to be a tzaddik, to have him fallen and risen again from your place of downfall, to rise back up and do teshuvah, that is much greater. And here's something just incredible. Right before the story of Joseph being tempted, seduced by this master's wife, the Torah is going to insert a story between the sale of Joseph and the story of Potiphar. We have Judah, a little sidebar in the Parsha, where Judah has a daughter-in-law. It's a long story. He had 3 sons. His first 2 sons were married to the same woman, because when one died, the next woman married them based on the laws of levirate marriage, Er and Onan. And then the second one died, and now this woman, Tamar, was meant to marry the 3rd son, Onan. Shelah. But Judah was reluctant to give his son Shelah to Tamar because 2 of his sons already died married to her, and it wasn't a good omen. And long story, she knew that she was destined to have a child with Judah, which she was. King David was the descendant. And what does she do? She dresses up. It's an unbelievable story. She dresses up like a harlot, like a promiscuous woman, like a prostitute on the side of the road. And amazing story how Judah is going to tend to his flock. He sees this woman. He wants to be with her. She says, give me payment. He says, I don't have any cash on me, so to speak. But what I'll do is I'll give you 3 things: my signet ring, my staff, and my wrap, and then I'll send payment and I'll collect it. He lies with her, leaves his items, and then later he sends payment, and his servants come back and say, we don't see this woman on the side of the road anymore. She's not there, and doing her services. Anyways, ultimately he hears that his daughter-in-law Tamar is pregnant. He thought she was with a stranger, which she was not allowed to be. She had to be waiting to marry the 3rd son, Shelah, that he was delaying and procrastinating to do. And famously, she sends a message with the 3 items. Judah's walking stick, his signet ring, and his wrap, and says, whoever these items belong to is the man from whom I'm pregnant. And he says the famous words, Satka mimeni, she is more righteous than I am. I am the father of this baby. She is innocent. It was my mistake. I did not give her Shayla, and now look what she did. Judah admits his mistakes, his faults. And then he does that as well. He's the one who says, let's sell Joseph from the pit for money, to get some money, profit. He says, Ma betza. In this week's place, he says, what profit will we get if we just let him die in the pit? Let's sell him as a slave. And 2 weeks from now, when Benjamin is taken by the viceroy, he's the one, Judah, who stands up and says, I won't let you take Benjamin, take me instead. And he's the one who takes responsibility to bring Benjamin back to Egypt from his father Jacob. He says, I'll bring him back. So he shows us the power of teshuvah, of having made mistakes, but having regretted it and changing course. So it's just an incredible idea that, there's 2 paradigms. There's the tzaddik paradigm, which is Joseph, but then there's the Baal Teshuvah paradigm, which is Judah. And believe it or not, the greater one is the Baal Teshuvah. Now, we now come to the ultimate story, the story of the brothers tearing off the coat of many colors from their brother Joseph and throwing him into a pit. And if you're following the story inside, it all begins on page 202 in the Blue Art Scroll. In the regular, it's chapter 37, verses I'm looking at starting from verse 12. And here we have just an incredible little prelude to the actual story. It says that Jacob says to his son Joseph, hey, the brothers are not home, go see where they're at. So he goes out to look for the brothers in Shechem, Nablus, where he was eventually buried. And he goes out to Shechem, and a man sees him, and the man sees that he is Tohe Basadeh, which means he is blundering, so to speak. Let's see how the Art Scroll translates it. Yeah, blundering in the field. He looks a little lost, when you ever driving your car and there's somebody who's like going very slow and turning this way, like they look lost. They don't look like they know where they're going, right? You could tell a driver that doesn't know where they're going. They're trying to decide. Well, this man sees that Joseph looks lost. So he goes over to Joseph and says, what are you looking for? He says, I'm looking for my brothers. Have you seen them? He says, yeah. I heard them say they're going to go towards Dosan. And sure enough, he heads towards Dosan. And that's where the whole story unveils. The brothers see him coming. They say, all right, here comes the dreamer. You know what? Let's throw him in the pit. He'll die in the pit. We'll see how many of his dreams are going to come to fruition, will be realized when he dies in the pit. Like, let's see. And then we all know what happens. Judah says, why let him die and make no money off the deal? Let's take him out. There's a caravan of Ishmaelites coming. Let's take him out, sell him to the Ishmaelites and then to the Midianites, and then it ultimately ends up in Egypt. But right here, there's a lot of discussion on who is this man who met him on the road. You ever looking for directions? Today you have Waze, but in the olden days, you would stop and ask a stranger on the street. Or maybe you're walking down the block, you're not sure where something is, you stop some random person. This person is Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. You have no idea who they are. They're just a random person. And one option, the commentary said, they just met some random guy who said, hey, what are you looking for? How can I help you? Others say, no, it was a special angel that came to point Joseph towards the brothers, because the story of the Jewish family had to unfold by Joseph going into Egypt and then ultimately the family coming there, and the whole story of the Egyptian slavery, enslavement and bondage and redemption and everything that was to follow. But either way, whether it was just a random person or it was an angel sent to move Joseph in that direction, it gives us a lot to think about. Gives us a lot to think about. How many people have we met along our life's journey who pointed us in a certain direction? That had we not met this person, we would not have taken that course in life. And when we look back, we say, wow, who was that person? Was that an angel sent by God? How different would Joseph's life have been had he not met this person? He would have just not been able to find the brothers. He would have turned back, told his father, hey, couldn't find the brothers. And granted, he would not have been thrown into the pit and sold into slavery, but he also would not have become viceroy of Egypt, and he would not have brought the family to Egypt, and he would not have all the sequence of events that had to occur. So there's a lot to think about in terms of who are the angels that God sends into our lives, whether they're real angels or whether they're people who are sent as messengers. The real meaning of a word angel is a messenger to guide us, to lead us to our destination that we need to come to. And what's interesting is now from the perspective of the guy, this random person sees Joseph. God put that person there to guide Joseph. But the question is, that guy didn't even know what he was doing. He said, okay, I heard him going this direction. He went on his way. He doesn't even know the end of the story. How many times are we the vehicles or the angels to point other people in a certain direction? That God puts people in our path so we could guide them or lead them to a certain point that we may not even know the end of the story. But the point is, every day, we may be those angels that God is sending into the lives of others. I'll tell you a story I once heard. It's just incredible. There's so many stories that could illustrate this point. But in Israel, I would say the largest institution for children with special needs. We're having a special Hanukkah party here at the shul for Project Connect for children with special needs. But in Israel, there's an organization called Shalva. You can look it up, Shalva. It is most probably the biggest institution, not only in Israel, but maybe in the world. I don't know. It looks like a university campus. I don't remember the numbers, but I think it's like 200,000 square feet. It's huge, huge building. And it has like 5 floors with unbelievable stuff. Thousands of kids come every day. There's a preschool, and then there's after school programs. And I could spend the rest of the class just talking about Shalva. I visited it many, many times. It's just the most. They have a whole floor for mothers when they give birth to a child with special needs. They bring the mothers to teach them how to cope, how to deal with the children, how to, they deal with. They have basketball courts and swimming pools, everything, sensory rooms, music rooms, a concert hall, like a entertainment room. As a matter of fact, if you want to look up something on the internet, they have a special band called the Shalva Band, all kids with special needs. And a couple of years ago, they have the big competition in Europe, the Euro, I forgot what it's called. And the Shalva Band won an award. And you could see the YouTube video. It got who knows how many views. This blind girl sang so beautifully. It was in the Euro competition. I forgot what it's called. Maybe somebody remembers that Israel won an award as well. Anyways, who is the founder of Shalva? The founder of Shalva is Mr. and Mrs. Kalman Samuels. Kalman Samuels has been to the Palm Beach Synagogue many times. He's a man with these days a white beard, religious man. How did he start Shalva? The story is, again, long story short, because I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but they have a lot of children, and one of their children was born. Thank you, Amy, shalva.org. One of their children was born healthy, but tragically, they went to get immunization shots, and unfortunately, it was a defected or contaminated batch of immunization shots, that whatever that particular one was. And tragically, their healthy boy, Yossi, little baby boy, came home, and slowly but surely, things started to get worse and worse until he lost his hearing and his eyesight. Now, being blind and deaf means you have no input or output. How do you connect with the world around you if you're both deaf and blind? Long story short, they went through a lot of therapies until somebody managed to find a way to connect with Yosef through his hands by having him feel something and then like tapping letters. Long story short, Yosef is now a man who's the boy is now a 40-something-year-old man, and he has an apartment in Shalva upstairs because his parents started this organization to help children like their son. When Dini and I were there a number of years ago, we went upstairs and visited with Yossi. And we saw he was reading a newspaper. Now, when I say reading a newspaper, it means there was a nurse there who was tapping into his finger what the newspaper said. And he could talk through the tapping back with his nurse. Incredible story. And the parents started a little program for other kids' special needs, and then got a building and a bigger building. And just about maybe 10 years ago, they finished this huge campus in Jerusalem. Incredible campus. And it's filled with love and light and colors. It's not a sad place. It's a beautiful place. Hundreds of volunteers come every day, religious boys and girls and non-religious boys and girls. It's just a beautiful situation. Anyways, but what am I driving at? What I'm driving at is the founder. The founder is Mr. Rabbi and Rebbitzin Kalman Samuels. Now, Kalman's wife I've never met. She's very low key. She runs the organization behind the scenes. But Kalman is the face of the organization. You probably could find videos of him on the internet. He's always out there promoting, raising money, doing all sorts of things. And he's been to Palm Beach a few times. And here's the amazing story. And I think it's just like the story of a man encountered him. Kalman grew up, I don't know, back in the 70s, and I forgot which part of America, regular secular kid. And one summer he was taking a trip to Europe, but I think to make his grandfather or his grandmother happy, they said, why don't you stop in Israel along the way for a couple of days? So he said, fine, I'll stop in Israel, okay. So here he's this teenager with long hair, in the 70s, not teenager, college kid, and he's taking a bus ride in Israel somewhere. And he happens to be sitting next to a religious Jew. And this religious Jew is a friendly guy. And he says, hi, what's your name? He says, he wasn't Kalman back then. He was Mark, whatever his name was. I forgot. Kenny Samuels. My name's Kenny. Where you from? I'm from America. Which part of America? Pennsylvania. Yeah. What brings you to Israel? He says, I'll tell you the truth. I'm on the way to Europe. I'm going to Italy. I want to learn Italian. And I'm going to be spending a few months there learning Italian. But on the way, I did a few days in Israel. And this religious man says to him, do you know what Gemara is? Have you ever learned Gemara? He says, Gemara. Gemara is the Hebrew word for Talmud. He says, Gemara, I don't know what that is. He says, do you know what Mishnah is? Mishnah is like the rabbinical tea. He says, no, I don't know what Mishnah is. And this religious man says to him, you don't even know your own heritage. Why are you going to learn Italian if you don't even know your own heritage? First, learn what it is to be a Jew, and then you could go learn other cultures and other heritages. And the next bus stop, the guy gets up. It's his turn to get off the bus. The religious guy leaves the bus. And for some reason, which Kalman explains why it resonated with him, because he had a professor about it back at college who always said, learn who you are first. And something along those lines. So it hit him like, this religious man with the white beard is right. Why am I learning other cultures? I didn't learn my own. And it really got him. He started to think about it. And he decided, instead of going off to Italy to learn Italian, whatever language he wanted to learn, maybe I should study Judaism. Instead of going on to the next leg of his trip, he went and enrolled in a yeshiva in Israel. Long story short, he started learning Torah, he became observant, became a rabbi, married a religious woman in Israel, started a family, and the rest is history. He lives in Israel today, and he's the founder of Shalva. But he told me this story. He says, I don't even know who this man is till today. Some stranger on the bus. So I had to 10-minute conversation with, who said, why are you going to, when you learn about Judaism first? Okay, that's my stop. I got to go. But that one conversation changed his whole trajectory in life. And not only does he have a beautiful family and he's a religious Jew and he has grandchildren now and everything else, but he brought about an organization in Israel, which is a world-class center as a model for all countries, how to take care of those children who are special needs challenged. And does this religious person who told him, go learn your own heritage, even know what that conversation did? He has no idea. There's no way he could know, possibly. But that's the truth of life. So many times we are that angel. God put him next to him on the bus to make that comment to him. He gets credit for doing it. But the point is, we never know how we're shaping people's lives, how we're affecting. And by the way, I hate to say this, but it could work the other way. A negative comment, offensive comment could, God forbid, have negative effects on a person. Way more. Sometimes we don't realize how much harm we could do to somebody, and we don't realize how much good we could do for someone. Now, sometimes we're privileged to find out. Someone comes back to you 10, 20 and says, I want you to know, when you told me this, when you did me this favor, it changed my whole life, everything. But sometimes we'll never know. And therefore, at every turn in life, we have to try to be that angel, that positive angel, because we never know the story we're helping to write or shape. And it's just an incredible, incredible lesson in life. We only have a few minutes, so one more thought. They throw him in the pit, they sell him into slavery, then they take his coat of many colors, they dip it in goat's blood, which is similar to human blood. They bring it back to their father, and they say, Dad, do you recognize this coat in blood? A wild animal must have attacked and devoured Joseph, and we found this coat in the field. And they lead their father to believe that Joseph died from an animal attack, and all that remained was this coat of dripped in blood. Now, that's why it's going to be the shock of his life when he's reunited with Joseph ultimately. But here's something very powerful. The Torah says that Jacob fell into deep, deep grieving for his son, because remember, this was his favorite beloved son, the first son of his beloved wife Rachel, who he bestowed so much kindness upon, and now the son is dead at 17 years old. The worst tragedy any parent could ever know, especially the child that he loved so much above all and everyone else. And the Torah tells us the following. The Torah says, it's in chapter 37, verse 34. It says, Jacob ripped his clothing as mourners. He put he put the sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. And then it says, all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to comfort himself and said, for I will go down to the grave mourning for my son. And his father bewailed him. So the Torah describes the unsoothable pain of Jacob as he says, I will never stop grieving for my beloved son Joseph. Now Rashi takes it interestingly. Rashi quotes the Talmud that says that, there's a blessing that God instilled in human nature, that God forbid if someone loses a loved one, they're able to be comforted with time. They never forget, but at least they don't remain paralyzed with grief. They could move forward with their lives. But that blessing is only if the person actually died. In the case of Joseph, Joseph was alive, and therefore he was inconsolable, because deep down he felt, I can never get closure, because he maybe wasn't fully convinced that Joseph was dead, even though the evidence was in. Coat is here, many colors, blood. What other logical explanation is? But like a loving father, he refuses to close the chapter. He refuses to give up on his son. He refuses to believe that his son is dead. He hopes against all odds that maybe he's still alive. And therefore he never stops grieving for his son, because he has this hope. And the hope turned out to be true and correct. He was right. That instinct he had that maybe he's not dead was right. He was alive, and he was reunited with him at the end of his life for the last 17 years of his life. And he even merited to see Joseph's children, grandchildren from this son Joseph. And again, this is such a know is Israel. Israel is the Jewish nation. Our story is the story of Jacob, or the story of Israel. A nation that refuses to lose hope. A nation that always, against all the odds, when all the pundits and all the evidence and all the statistics say there's no hope for the Jewish people, there'll never be a future. But look at us. Look at the story of Yerushalayim, the Jewish people's return to Jerusalem after thousands of years of exile. Just like Jacob, we never gave up hope. And as it says, I will remember Jerusalem at the height of my joy. We always remember Jerusalem on the rivers of Babylon. We wept and we cried for. We never gave up hope. And when you never give up hope, you ultimately see the fulfillment of your dream. And Jacob saw it in his lifetime. We saw it in our lifetime, but it's not over yet. We're still waiting for Mashiach. And I just want to mention today's the 19th day of Kislev, the day that the Alter Rebbe, Rav Shneur Zalman Uvadi, the author of the Tanya, who taught Chassidus, the Chassidic doctrine of the Baal Shem Tov through Chabad, was liberated from imprisonment. It's considered a Chassidic holiday. And what's the whole idea of Chassidus? To light up the path to the ultimate redemption. Jews have been waiting for thousands of years for Mashiach. And the Baal Shem Tov says, we're going to bring a new light into the world that is going to ultimately dispel the darkness and bring Mashiach. And just like Jews have never given up on all of our dreams, just like Jacob never gave up on seeing Joseph, we will never give up on the promise of the ultimate redemption. And no matter how bleak or how dark things may look in the world, we'll never lose that hope, because that hope, that belief, that faith is the legacy of Jacob, that he taught us that if you never stop believing and having that hope, you will ultimately realize the promise and the fulfillment of that redemption. So let us begin this 4-part series of the story of Joseph, because it's one of the most inspiring, touching stories that all of us could apply to our lives on one level or another. There's so much to be gained, so much to be gleaned, so much to be learned in this week's Torah portion. Someone asked me and wanted a text to answer. It says there are 2 messiahs. We just talked about Mashiach, the light of Chassidus, to ultimately banish the ultimate darkness and prepare us for the ultimate redemption of Mashiach. It says there are 2 Mashiachs. First, there'll be Mashiach ben Yosef, and then Mashiach ben David. Joseph, as we discussed, and then David. David is the descendant of Judah, from the house of Judah. And why 2 Mashiachs? And once again, because both of these directions of service of God are vital. We need the tzaddik, who is the straight light, the righteous, perfect person like Joseph, and then the person who comes from the darkness and transforms the darkness to create the light. So first there'll be level 1 stage, redemption, that will come through Mashiach ben Joseph. But the ultimate one, like I said, comes through the Baal Teshuvah, the one who returned. And one of the things of Chassidut as well, why it entered into the world, is to help us in that service of bringing a greater light into the world, to find a path to redemption, but also to help those who are strayed away, who have turned away, sometimes by no fault of their own. They were never taught Judaism. It's been lost for generations in their family. But the Baal Teshuvah, the ability to come back to Judaism, even if you had been away from it. And that's a phenomenon in our generation known as the Baal Teshuvah movement. There's a whole movement of thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people who, with no Jewish background and upbringing, found their way to Judaism, to Torah, embraced it, joined it. And this is our generation, the final preparations for Mashiach. May it come speedily, as we have a tradition that Baal Shem Tov's soul once ascended on high and he saw Mashiach and he said, when are you going to come? And he said, when your teachings, when your well springs will be spread out all over. And tonight at the Palm Beach Synagogue, in the next door space, in the restaurant space, we're having a Farbrengen, a musical kumsitz in honor of Yutes Kislev. So if you're available 8 p.m., just come out and celebrate Yutes Kislev with us here at the synagogue. Wishing everyone a wonderful day, and thank you all for joining. Shalom. Chag Sameach.